Okay, good evening. Just letting a few more people join us. I have quite the introduction, so hopefully by the time the introduction is complete, we will have a nice group of folks. So good evening and welcome. This is get my script together. On behalf of the PGA One Guild Women's Impact Network, I'd like to welcome you to the sixth and final session of our Equity in Our Industry series. In this six-part series, we've touched on how we can make meaningful change in our industry in the areas of writing and development, casting, crewing up, financing, marketing and distribution. And now our final session is combining our shared knowledge across all of those areas for institutional change. My name is Stephanie Dawson. I am a PGA WIN member. I'm also the co-chair of the PGA Green Committee and a member of the AP Council. And I will be your moderator for this evening. And I'd love to introduce our wonderful panel. As you may have seen in the advertisement, we have a couple folks who were unable to make it. So due to personal reasons, Darnell Moore is unable to join us, but in his place, his colleague, Corinne Fry Fuentes, who is the manager of inclusion strategy for content and marketing at Netflix, is joining us. Corinne has a background in community organizing and has worked with local governments, human resources, and in the nonprofit world. Thank you, Corinne, for joining us for such short notice. Also, due to personal reasons, Dwight Keynes was unable to be with us, but his colleague Tara Halloran is here. Tara is the VP of Inclusion, Talent and Content at Universal Pictures. Tara has prior experience developing talent with the UK government, as well as private industries, and forging strategic partnerships with organizations such as Pinewood Studios and the British Film Commission. She's also currently a BAFTA board member. Madeline Donano, President and CEO of the Gina Davis Institute on Gender and Media, which is the leading research-driven advocacy organization working within the entertainment and media industry to create gender balance, foster inclusion, and reduce negative stereotyping in family entertainment media. Donano leads the Institute's strategic direction, fundraising, D&I programs, research, a lot, finance, and operational activities, and has a background across entertainment, nonprofit, digital, and consumer packaging goods industries with companies such as On the Scene Productions, the Hallmark Channel, Universal Studios Home Entertainment, and ABC television networks. And Kristen Marston, who is the Culture and Entertainment Advocacy Director at Color of Change, which is a racial justice nonprofit, where she helped launch a groundbreaking study on crime procedurals called Normalizing Injustice, and worked to launch the Change Hollywood Initiative in collaboration with Michael B. Jordan to provide actionable solutions that Hollywood can make to move our industry toward real change. Welcome. I'm so excited that you're here. So I'm just going to open up the conversation. We have basically about 40 minutes worth of questions, and then I'm going to go to Q&A. So those of you who are attending, please put your questions in the Q&A box. Better than the chat because it kind of gets lost in the chat, but please give us your questions and we'll try to get to as many as we can near the end. So I just want to first, for all of you, we've talked about your various organizations. We have people who are in more the research space and consulting space, and we also have content creators and providers. So I wanted to maybe just kind of get us on the same page around what does equity mean for us? What kind of initiatives are you both pushing for and hoping for in your organizations? And we can kind of, this is open to everyone, but I'd love for everyone to kind of speak to, how that applies for your organization. Tara, do you want to start?
Yeah, I'll start off for sure. Thanks, Stephanie. For us, equity is driven from within the business. And I just joined NBCU 4 months ago, and I asked about quotas and goals and all of this. And it was like, no, we're going to look at the business and then we set the goals around that, looking at people as opposed to the quotas, which was very exciting for me. So we have started by taking off, running initiatives in-house, primarily where we see a business need, we own that and start something from the ground up. And when that's a good fit, we look outside and partner with wonderful organizations. So that's the starting plan for us in terms of our approach to equity.
Thank you. Corinne, do you want to follow up?
Yeah, I'm happy to. Really grateful to be here with you brilliant folks. I think for us, equity is key to the work that we do in inclusion strategy, right? It is creating opportunity where historically there hasn't been. And our entertainment industry is no exception to, all the different industries that have historically excluded folks. And our institution is no different within the doors of Netflix. So as an inclusion strategy team, we focus on that internal health of our organization, our Netflix employees. And we believe when, representation looks like our members, we will better serve our members. It's very much driven by member joy, and we believe that in authentic storytelling. So not only is there that business need, but it is truly what is the direction of our world, is being able to tell more true or untold stories in an authentic way. So how do we do that? By creating equity. That's within hiring, that's within, continuing to coach our leaders, our existing content executives, et cetera, increasing their inclusion lens, as well as our HRBPs and talent organization. So it looks like competency building, it looks like diversifying talent pipelines, all to help increase that representation within the walls of Netflix, so that our viewers, our members will experience that authentic feeling that you feel when you see yourself represented on screen.
Wonderful. Kristen.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm really grateful because I work for an all Black organization, or mostly Black organization. We definitely have, different groups working within our different teams as well. But what I will say is that we work with different organizations externally. So through our Change Hollywood initiative that you had mentioned that we launched, one of the things that we do to help people to be accountable to taking next steps moving forward, right? So like we obviously all saw people saying, posting statements and saying like, we stand with Black lives, we stand with, what we stand with this moment last year in response to everything that was happening. So we were like, we want to create this initiative. But, we really want them to be accountable to actually doing internal audits, assessing back past practices, and that doesn't like exclude us, right, as the Black organization, but also like these production companies and these studios, and hopefully at some point unions who are signing on are going to say like, we're going to assess past practices and say like, how many Black staff are we hiring, where is the turnover rate, how many are assistants, how many are execs, who are we giving green lighting power to, right, if it's like at studios or production companies, and then saying like, okay, we know our past patterns, how are we going to move forward in a better way? And so I think it's hard to move forward in a better way if you haven't assessed your past practices, right? And so what we want to avoid is like people doing Band-Aid solutions and saying like, this feels good because we're doing it, but we don't actually even know what we were doing before. And so we want people to do that initial assessment and move forward in that way. And I think all of us have to be accountable to that. And so that's where we're at, and some of the things that we're working on within the industry.
Great. And Madeline.
So in terms of, what does equity look like? For us, it's really about achieving, intersectional equity on screen, because the PGA and many other organizations have been fighting the battle, including everyone on this call, for better representation in the workplace, which is really conscious bias. And we looked at what was happening in terms of on-screen is really unconscious bias. And so, for us, as a fairly young organization, when you think about nonprofits, we've been able to achieve 2 out of 3 of our mission goals, which was gender equity for female lead characters in the largest grossing family films out of the US, and gender equity for female lead characters in the top Nielsen rated television shows. But when it comes to the intersectionality of gender and race and LGBTQIA and disabilities and age, 50 plus and body type, those numbers are fairly, glacial. And when you look at other variables like racism, sexism, lack of occupations, we have a long way to go. So, for us, that's kind of how we look at, equity, from an intersectional lens. And our theory of change is grounded in data, because data has been the key to driving change within leading, content, creators. So that's really what, kind of how we define, equity in terms of on-screen representation.
Thank you. I think there's so many different areas we can go to from there, but let's start just as a series did. Let's start with writing and development. So I know from like Color Change and the Gina Davis Institute, you have various measures and reports that you put out into the world. So I'd love for you to maybe give us some parameters that you've seen over your research and over your time working with different I know that you both consult with actual in writing rooms and with organizations to hire writers. So can you give us maybe an image of the landscape of what you've seen, what has changed and what has yet to change as we move forward?
Kristen, do you want to go first or?
Sure, I can go first. I feel like it's such a huge question, but I feel like progress has definitely been made. I think there's conversations that still need to be had as far as like from my side of things, we're consulting on storylines with Black characters, and also like really specifically like I'm not a replacement for Black writers, but really is specifically like issues that impact Black communities, right? And so I think there's a lot of like headway that needs to be made as far as like, we don't want people to feel bad. Like it's like if, for example, if it's a criminal justice narrative, we don't want people to say like, oh, that's one bad police officer, but I don't feel anything because like that was just like one jerk, right? Like we want people to really understand the systems and structures at play, in this country. And so really like, I think there's a lot of work to be done at like highlighting, underlining systems and structures. And that really is like across the board, right? So like we're like a Black nonprofit, but we also like systems and structures affect women and Native American people and like every community, right? Community that has not been, represented in the way that they should have been. And so how do we highlight those systems and structures instead of making people feel bad about one person, which doesn't really like highlight the things that people need to know. And so I think, there's still more work to be done there. I think there's more work to be done about like, like it's, Black people are like now overrepresented on TV, which is, something we can't say about certain communities, right? Like Native American communities, but the issue is still like misrepresentation, right? And so whereas that conflict of, this like, is it worse to be misrepresented or underrepresented, right? And so how do we have these conversations about the wide variety of our experiences versus like a single narrative? And how do we start to say like Black people are more than one thing? And the same for like criminal justice narratives. And so I think creators are starting to, at least, some of the ones that I work with realize that they have a power to create significant cultural change. And so how do we hone in on that power and really work with creators to say like, you're doing some amazing things and we want to help you refine that.
So for us, I mean, think about it logically, with the entertainment industry being so big and so global, there's no way we can be in every writer's room. Impossible. So for us, we've been developing tools so that you can all help yourselves. And yes, we measure the industry. Yes, we work on a one-on-one basis with our leading partners. We evaluate what they're doing, kind of give them a report card. But for writing specifically, what's been most helpful is one of the tools that we have, which is called Spell Check for Bias, which was developed using patented IP from our partners at USC Viterbi School of Engineering. And essentially, it breaks down a script from a DEI lens, which, trained readers are just not trained in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it really helps paint a blueprint of who are the characters that are speaking and contributing. And are they described and they're not described? Because most of the time we think about the top of the call sheet. We don't really think about everybody else. And it's been a way to bridge conversations with data between DEI executives, which now are all sitting in the business units, which was not the case 5 years ago. Most of the DEI executives sat in HR or CSR. So they're in the business unit, they're looking at content, they have to give notes to the creative executives who hate getting notes. And then the creative executives have to protect the authentic truth of the storyteller, right? Because otherwise you'll really hate our guts. So this type of data has enabled those conversations to those different groups coming together because they all want the same result. And it's been, very helpful. But I do want to talk about, so one of our partners is also TIE, the Think Tank for Inclusion and Equity. And it's a group that are all WGA writers. And we just worked with them on a survey. And, even though there's been some improvement, I did want to quote from that in terms of the upper levels of the writers' room, it's still lacking, with 97.4% of writers reporting that their most recent writers' rooms had no upper level people with disabilities, no LGBTQIA, and almost 35% said no BIPOC at upper levels. So there's improvement on the lower levels, but not at the higher levels. And 36% of underrepresented writers had to repeat staff writer level positions. So there's still a lot that needs to happen in terms of the writer's room, but our approach is, can we empower you all with the tools? Because think about it, it's a lot cheaper to fix it on the front end than on the back end. How many times have you been in that room during a test screening and all of a sudden, there are many things that are pointed out by an audience that could have been fixed if it was addressed in the script.
No, very, very, very true. So I guess I'll shift now to Corinne, if you can maybe speak to some of the efforts that Netflix is doing either with their original programming or acquisitions, kind of reflecting on more authentic storytellers or the stories that you're putting into your streaming service.
Yeah, I'm happy to share. And I think this is where I'm sitting and I'm reflecting of how it truly is a multi-pronged approach, right? And you have, our producers, you have different points, you have content execs, you have all these different potential checks and balances that should be raising their hands and saying, hey, is this the right person to tell this story? Or haven't we heard this story before? And really getting candid and having those really courageous conversations. And up until I think this point, we've avoided them. And we've shied away from the uncomfortability of asking, a big showrunner, a huge name, a top talent, what does an inclusive space look like in your writer's room if you're telling a story about characters that you don't share the same lived experience? And it takes us, right, as parts of that checks and balances, to be doing our own individual work, to be able to raise our hand and ask those important questions and be those points of intervention, right? So that's what I'm reflecting on. And a lot of our work is around getting our folks equipped to raise their hand and ask those questions along the way, and to be those checks and balances, and also to seek out stories. And this is where I think is a big gap in an area that we can partner on, is building relationships with folks that and finding those stories that aren't typical and aren't coming from your typical source and places. And that's where, you all as producers, I think we all have to check our biases and check, who are the folks that we're leaning towards, who are the folks that we're really betting on, and how are we funding them? How are we thinking about and greenlighting those opportunities and believing in them? and how have our own biases and our own perspectives influenced those decisions. And the difference between trusting your gut and it potentially being a bias is something that we challenge our content execs as well as our production executives as well. Some of the things that we're doing internally, we're currently piloting a writer's room as well as a showrunner workshop. And we're shifting the industry in that, folks who are creatives, who are typically, to an earlier point stated, they are the creative vision. They are the person who is holding, this vision. And now we've asked them to be inclusive leaders. And that is a shift. And folks need tools and resources along the way. So how can we meet them where they are and equip them with the inclusive leadership skills that they need in order to be successful and to have productions that invite difference and embrace difference in a way that historically our industry hasn't been. It's been very hierarchical. It's been very for a certain type of folk, like this is the way it goes. And how do we shift the culture of our productions, shift the culture from the entire creative process, and just assume that all of it doesn't serve everybody. Let's start from that standpoint, right? That this and how we've been currently doing it doesn't work. And start from that point and then create points of intervention at every single step, and really create it with everyone in mind. And having that end goal be authentic representation, rather than creative complete control. And that is a shift, and that is dangerous to say, right? It's like, ooh, what does that look like? That's uncomfortable. But ultimately, to you all's point, it pays off in the end when you have members, when you have audiences who feel reflected and feel as though their lived experiences are authentically being represented and not tokenized on screen. So those are some of the initiatives. It's really focusing on our internal health and internal I&D lenses so that we can be that checks and balances internally. And then that point where we're working with partner managed productions, et cetera, and we can, offer our learnings and offer what we're learning from our own self-managed productions and offer that, knowledge and that wisdom out, and what's working and what's not.
That's great. I have a quick follow-up. I just wanted to clarify, are the initiatives that you're speaking about, are they mostly with the originals, or do you also have training and having people being able to speak up about the authenticity of the stories that you're acquiring?
It's largely on the originals. It's largely on the originals. I think licensing is a whole nother mamma jamma, which I would love to, more partnership and more, honestly, like knowledge around. The level of influence that we have by the time that we're licensing, it looks really different. So there can be, after a final cut, there's certain tweaks that can be made. But as far as character development and the core things that develop a story, we're focusing right now on the things that we're developing start to finish. But I don't think that's the end goal by any means.
That makes total sense. And Tara, at NBC or Universal, can you maybe share with us some of the around, how you support stories that are getting developed and the new storytellers? Can you maybe talk about those efforts at your organization?
For sure. And Stephanie, yeah, you're right. It is NBCU I'm working for, as opposed to just Universal Pictures. So it's right across film, TV, and streaming. There's a lot happening. We take the DEI space really seriously. We're a team of nearly 20. So there's a lot of initiatives happening in every part of the business. As Madeline said, I work in the business. And then we partner and connect with all of our groups. And that's what we're looking to do. We're not a DEI team to tick a box or bring something in a nice package and here it's done, and then we go away. We listen, what do you need, what do you want? We'll do it with you, but let's embed this in your team, in your department, so that you own it and you run with it and make it real and create jobs out of it. So in terms of writing and directing and some of our flagship initiatives, we have very specific programs where we invest quite a lot for a small group of people, and we found that this works. So in writers, we have animation writers program, features writers program, unscripted directors. We will be doing something for showrunners. And with these programs, we take them on mostly for a year, but we pay our participants. We don't expect someone to come and just be like, oh, this is an honor to come in our program and do this. No, we will pay them a proper wage to be with us exclusively for the period of that time, that 12 months. We'll develop projects with them. And then we really want to pipeline them into the studio. That's the aim. It's a business aim. We want to work with you, but we're going to invest for that. And also that's how we partner with people just before that program entry. We'll partner with Ghetto Film School, AFI, Sundance, ABFF, many great organizations, so that they are feeding their creatives into our pipeline with the aim at the end of the day, let's pay some creatives for some jobs and to make our work better. So that's some of the programs. We look at every side of this business. And just to follow up on what Kristen said, which it just resonated with me about auditing, you know, I come from the world of talent development, and I love being in this world of running programs and courses, and I've done it for 20 odd years. I ran the Sundance Labs out of Europe and came here, started off running DEI programs 13 years ago. Auditing and tracking is key because there's a lot of programs. For me, an unsuccessful program is like, if we look back in 2 years and none of those writers are working, or where are those directors now? Let's make sure that we keep our participants and all our stakeholders alive in the system. Just because the program's over and we look great, no, keep them part of the family, keep them working. This is about job creation, making the industry better, and doing great work. So I love that you brought up that point, Kristen. It's so key when we, you know, everyone's so energetic at the beginning. Let's do this. Let's evaluate, let's audit, and let's track the talent and own the talent for a career. Hopefully a very long career too.
No, that's great, Tara. And I think your comment about paying participants who are in these labs is also very important, because class is another big issue that we in this industry, people who are able to afford to make that short film or afford to make, able to make their films or their projects without having to carry a full-time job. That's been a big barrier as well. So I want to stay with you and move into the next session that we talked about. You're talking about employing people and building that pipeline. So can you share with us some of the programs or some of the initiatives that you're doing at NBC Universal around crewing up and having behind the camera diversity?
Yeah, I'm leading on this in my new job, which I'm really thrilled about. I love the production space. So we're piloting apprenticeships in film and TV, and we are looking to add 6 trainees onto these initial productions, and hopefully, all going well, roll that out. It takes time to do this because we must do it with our guild friends and our union friends and make sure we are all aligned, because again, about jobs, we don't want to create a program that is like, oh God, these people aren't on the roster. Oh, they have all these skills and now they can't work. So, working alongside them is so key. So that takes a bit of time, but it's worth it. There's also budget. They're additional to the crew. We cannot be taking away crew positions. It's an extra person to assist and observe. So you know what? We need to put our hands in our pocket and pay those people. Union rates, that's agreed, that we're not putting anyone out, that they get paid overtime and all that. So we're piloting that in Los Angeles on a film to be announced. Very exciting. We're going to pilot this on TV on the East Coast and Georgia possibly, and also we are the Global Talent Development and Inclusion Department, so also globally, and very shortly we're doing this on an international production as well. So we're excited. Love this space. It's a space where we can accelerate, make things happen quickly. We've got to put our hands in our pockets and pay for some extra people on every single set.
Absolutely. And Corinne, did you want to speak to like any efforts that Netflix is doing around crewing up efforts that you have?
Similar apprenticeship programs, but I think I just want to underscore, I think the core part of equity is creating opportunity. That is, to me, at the essence of what equity is. It's changing up what has been status quo, and where there hasn't been opportunity, creating it. And where there are these fake imaginary barriers, completely obliterating them, because it doesn't need to be. Let's add more people, let's add more money to the budget, and let's pay folks top of market for their work. And I think social economic is such a huge barrier. As someone who, I grew up in South Central Los Angeles, and I never saw myself in the entertainment industry. 10 minutes away from me was where all the movies in Hollywood were being made, and it was just never accessible to the high schools that I went to, and just my own personal lived experience. It just never was a career path that I could see myself in. And I think how we change that is by creating these opportunities for folks to get the credits, to get the titles on their resume in order for them to be able to be a part of this industry. And that looks like evaluating all access points, including unions. So yeah, it's exciting work. And, you know, for us, it's still building. We're very much inside of that initial building phase as far as focusing on below the line, but it is extremely important.
Thank you. I was going to shift gears to toward casting, but Kristen or Madeline, did you want to speak to the topic of crewing up?
I think all I can say is storytellers tell stories that they know or love. So if there's a 5-to-1 ratio of male to female storytellers, clearly the output on screen is going to be far less. And what we found in looking at a global, at the largest global film markets, when there was the presence of a female writer or director, it was a 6.8 to 7.5% increase in on-screen roles. So there is a direct correlation. So all the work that's being done in terms of filling that pipeline, a diverse pipeline, will directly impact the output of the creative that we see.
Kristen, did you go ahead?
Yeah, I'll just add to that. I mean, I think, you know, we've been kind of, you know, last year I sponsored Diverse Representations Black Executive Pipeline Program. And we just sponsored another program to try to bring Black creators into the pipeline and actually teach them about like every aspect of the industry, right? So they get mentorship from like filmmaking, they get to create a film, and they get to like actually meet with execs and figure out what their path is from people who are like in different parts of the country. And so I think that's important too, is there's a lot of people who, you know, aren't in LA who will never have access. And so we want to make sure that we create that access. But we also know that as a nonprofit, we shouldn't necessarily be like solely responsible for creating these programs, right? Like we want to make sure that like studios and production companies and unions and et cetera, are taking on that responsibility. And we want to try to like encourage that shift. And so that, you know, people who have budgets are using those budgets accordingly. And so, you know, we're, you know, as a part of our Change Hollywood initiative, you know, people who sign on, we're kind of creating a network of like, if you sign on to this initiative, you're agreeing to support these programs who are on the ground, just like doing the good work, you know. So you're agreeing to invest in, you know, Black talent and careers. You're agreeing to invest in anti-racist content. You're agreeing to, you know, invest back into Black communities, but also invest in these programs who are really doing good work into bringing Black talent into the pipeline, and then also like programs that are like supporting Black talent who also like are like fully versed and know what they're doing, right? It's not just like a when we, yeah, I like see y'all nodding because it's like we all are on the same page, where it's like we know that it's not just like a lack of knowledge. So like I'm for mentorship programs, but it's also like, you know, there are plenty of you know, Black and brown, et cetera, talent who just are exceptional already, and we don't need to do that. We just need to make those connections. And so we're trying to support those connections as well, and make sure that those people are just being put forefront and being supported in their careers in the same way that they should have been supported historically.
Well said. In terms of, I think Madeline, you already touched on this a little bit, but I wondered if you could tell us about the other tool in terms of on-screen representation, how that affects people, and like, you know, what measures are you seeing? Are you seeing any change in any real, you know, forward movement in terms of on-screen representation?
Well, definitely when it comes to gender, because like I said, we achieved kind of 2 out of our 3 primary mission goals, but when it comes to overall representation, it's about 2-to-1. And then when you start looking at the intersectionality for LGBTQIA, disabilities, age 50 plus, body type, which are other dimensions that we look at, you know, race, we're seeing movement with race. We're not at parity in terms of the US population being 38%. but we definitely see, movement. But when it comes to that intersectionality, there's a tremendous amount of work that has to be done. And for the most part, most people haven't been really thinking about age that much, and or body type. 40% of our population in the United States are people with a larger body type. Most, I think, American women are a size, 12, not a 0. So they have some of the highest discrimination when it comes to on-screen portrayals in terms of being the brunt of the joke, all kinds of things. So there is movement, which is great because it shows particularly that this type of theory of change, this narrative culture change can work, but we definitely have a long way to go. And then there's other things, that come up. So we have an extensive code book of tropes and stereotypes that are historical, and that will also apply that when it comes to racism, sexism, cultural nuances, and particularly when you think about, the global marketplace, the cultural nuances and sensitivities in, South Asia are going to be very different to what they may be in the US or, or elsewhere. So, so there's a lot of additional layers, that we look at. There's, dwellings. Are you always showing characters in palatial settings? There's just so many different nuances depending on what it is, that you don't realize that you're sending a message that this type of person doesn't belong in this type of environment. So you kind of, there's just a lot of different aspects.
Can I just add, Stephanie, that NBCU have bought into all of this, and we put through so many scripts through spell check because these nuances, we don't have them with our team of 20. So I just want to say, like, this is a really great service and great partnership for us.
Corinne, did you want to speak to about on-screen representation? I know one of the big things, Netflix has had so many different kind of, not silos, but like specific communities that have been addressed, and you have playlists and things of that nature. So I don't know if you wanted to speak to on-screen representation.
No, just a long way to go. And so appreciative of the work of, folks like Color of Change, and as well as, Gina Davis Institute for the research and for just holding up a mirror. I think we have a long way to go. We've done well, but not well enough. So that's my main comment there.
So I want to shift just slightly. I'm gonna go to questions in just another minute or two. So over the course of this many-pronged series, it seems to me, and this may not be rocket science, but it seems to me that basically we're using our marketing and distribution models, which are based on past performance, that dictate which stories get told, and they dictate who gets to be in those stories, which then perform based on the marketing and distribution models that then create the cycle over and over again. So my big question is, from your vantage points, either through data or through consulting with organizations or through putting out your content, or which gatekeepers and greenlighters are involved, is there a particular pillar of the system, from casting, crewing, marketing, distribution, financing, and I may have missed one in there, is there a particular pillar that you feel like is the one we need to tip first that will affect the domino effect for other areas across our industry?
I'm going to just get in, Stephanie, because it's such a difficult question. I'm not going to give the neat answer. For me, this is many, many pillars. It's like the Parthenon in Athens. It's like there's so many. And you know what? We got to pick them all apart. And when I see a structure that has been there for decades, I like to naively go in from the outside and go, you know what? I'm going to ignore that. And I'm going to use my instinct to just, like, with talking to everyone, like, can we get through this? can we go through this? Is there another way? Because I think sometimes looking at that structure that hasn't worked, sometimes isn't the right way to go about it. So again, buy-in from our teams, buy-in from the business to actually see another route, and usually just sometimes getting hurt and going through, feeling awkward, feeling uncomfortable, that's okay. But you know what? Just because it happened like this for decades doesn't mean it's the right thing. So that's the clumsy answer for me.
I'm going to jump in on this one because it's very near and dear to our heart, is doing good is good for business. The data, there is imperative data. I mean, that shows that if you have diverse characters on screen, you will have diverse audiences and you will make the most money ever. You know, we affectionately call it the Gina Benchmark Report. And again, we looked at 10 years of the top 100 largest grossing films out of the US. And what we found is that female-centric films generated 55% more at the box office and over this 10-year period. And then when we looked at diverse casts, it made the most money. And it holds true in advertising. It holds true in terms of TV with ratings. It holds true, you know, in global film. And so, you know, I know for a lot of independent filmmakers and probably a lot of producers that are working with foreign sales agents, you know, these people just need to die off because it doesn't seem what data you put in front of them. They just fall back on an old model. But if you're not really looking at the numbers, you're leaving lots of money on the table. There's just absolutely no excuse moving forward. The data is there.
Just plus 1,000. The data is there. And on top of that, we're moving away from this. What I would love to see us move from in all of those pillars is the scarcity model, that there is not talent there, that there is not stories there, that there's not depth there. Like all of that, you know, people of color, folks from underrepresented, you know, their stories don't travel. All of these memes that are just, you know, it's really time to sunset them and to check our own bias and our own privilege and, you know, really examine what gape are we keeping, you know, and how can we break through that? But for me, in my seat, I see it as a multi-pronged approach and moving away from a scarcity mindset that it doesn't exist. You know, that's the first meme I feel like we need to bust at the door, that, you know, these stories don't exist and they're not here and I just can't find, because they are. We're not looking and we're not building relationships with people of difference. And that's an uncomfortable conversation to have, but one that's needed across industry and across all of those pillars. But financing, of course, always stands out to me because it is the one that is so blatant. And when you compare, you know, especially when you think of, you know, Black films that, you know, when it comes to drama, when it comes to comedy, you know, you'll have bets on them, but they won't compare in budget. And they won't compare in budget at all to white, you know, written or cast led films and showcases, and that's repeating the cycle over and over again, blatantly. So checking our biases and moving away from a scarcity model in all of those different categories.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. I think you know, we've been working with really closely with like agencies, for example, WME and Endeavor content to really like revise the process of like when scripts get flagged and they get sent to cultural consultants, and so flagging those issues very early on versus like when I get a script and it's like, oh, we're shooting next week, do you have any flags? Right, we've been working on this for 4 years. Are there any issues? And so how do we you know, work with people to get in line with the content very early on with agents and managers and anyone else who is involved in the process, and so that we're not just creating content that's actually problematic and harmful, right? And so these things seem very basic to some of us who work in a space, but like we actually still get a lot of scripts that are like very harmful and very like traumatic, right? Like it's all Black trauma, or there's no joy in the storylines of Black characters. And a lot of times those projects will be, you know, when we said tell Black stories, we didn't mean for only white men to write stories about Black communities and then not hire any Black like co-writers or hire any Black staff on those projects and then try to profit off of our stories, right? And so I think, you know, being very mindful of like, if you have projects that have, you know, Black, Brown, LGBTQ plus, whatever the community native community story is, like hiring people from those communities and supporting their growth and their career trajectories, right? Like you shouldn't have a project about a certain community and not even be hiring someone onto that project who can speak to it, right? Because like I can consult on a storyline and if there's a director who doesn't really understand the cultural nuances, it could change the whole scene, right? And so we just want to be mindful of like who we're bringing on to like tell these stories at every single point in the process. So we could have, you know, the right directors, the right writers, but then marketing and distribution, they don't really know. It could, you know, it could totally change the trajectory of how the story is sold, and the film cannot do well based off of that. And I've seen that a couple of times, and you know, I'm sure you have as well. So I think being very cognizant of who you're staffing at every single point in the production process and make sure that like we're represented in every step of the way, I think is very important, but very like I think like in closing, just saying like starting early on is early in the process. If you can get people on, is the better, and will really like help. And it's not a policing mindset. It's more like we want you to make money too, and we want you to be represented well, and we don't want you to get dragged either. And so, you know, all of those things in mind, just bringing people on and ensuring we can help shape it in a way that we're not taking away but adding to the project that you're representing.
I want to go to a couple questions in the Q&A box. Thank you all. Again, I realize I'm going into the weeds a little bit, so I want to bring it back so I can invite other people into this conversation. But I'm enjoying every second. There's quite a few questions about age and over 50 plus, and so I wondered. I mean, anyone can answer, but I feel like this is maybe directed toward Tara and Corinne around the programs that you're, you know, bringing more people into your organizations and more creators. Do you have programs that specifically address age, people over 40, over 50? Can you speak to those and how people do access those programs kind of more generally?
I'll answer first, Stephanie, as a woman of a certain age, okay? So, you know, when we look at underrepresentation, we absolutely look at especially women over 50. And yes, but we do not have a specific program because we don't want that ghettoization of us either. You know, we want to be considered with all the talent, but yeah, absolutely, it is an area we are looking at in NBCU for sure.
Yeah, ageism is real, and you know the programs that you know our team puts on externally around writing rooms and you know panels, et cetera, that are seeking out and networking with folks. It's something that's top of mind for us, and I would say please connect with me on LinkedIn. I would love to keep you updated. If you're here in the chat, feel free to add me to your network, and I'll be sure to share you know all of those external programs that we have that are about talent pipelining, et cetera. But it's definitely something that's top of mind for us, and definitely a huge access point barrier.
I just want to dig a little deeper. So if there's no like specific program, what communities are you going to, like how do people access the programs? Just to make sure that, you know, our audience, obviously there's been several questions about it. So I just want to make sure that we address how can individuals who fit in those categories reach those programs, and how are you reaching them?
I'll just say quickly, our website, Global Talent Development and Inclusion, GTDI, at NBCU. You put that in, you'll find a lot of programs and initiatives. And then we connect very directly with many partners to spread the word, also on our social media. So follow us, check the website, find me on LinkedIn. As Corinne said, you know, we have a lot going on, and it's our job to know about new talent as opposed to young talent, and to make our work better by, you know, working with new creative talent, below the line talent, and producers.
Absolutely. I recommend following our We Are Netflix account, which is our employer branding. You're going to get a lot of information about what it is to, work at Netflix. And you'll also see, the benefits that we have, et cetera, that cater to all folk. I highly recommend following them on LinkedIn, et cetera, because that's where we're going to be, hosting a lot of those workshops, et cetera. So if you're tapped into that LinkedIn, you'll see those updates and programming that will occur. So yes, tap into them, and they're also available on Instagram, all the socials. We Are Netflix.
There's another question about Native Indigenous communities. How are you engaging with Native and Indigenous communities? Anyone can really speak to it, but I guess or assume it's directed more toward the network folks on the call, but anyone can speak to it.
Well, we have partnership with LA Skin Fest just this week. We met 8 writers and directors out of their program. We also have a wonderful sitcom called Rutherford Falls. So we are working with external partners, but working with Indigenous creators is also like such a priority area for us.
Yeah, we have an incredible partnership with Illuminative, folks that are doing incredible work with Indigenous populations in the US. Actually just met with them this year, and they're also partnering with us. Some of that, competency building content that we were talking about that's available for all Netflix employees. They're helping us build some of that out, and we're super excited about their knowledge. Excitingly as well, we launched our first Indigenous at employee resource group last year. So, that population is increasing internally, and it's so exciting to see that community flourish and help continue to make us better, because there's so much work to do as it pertains to Indigenous representation on screen. And I think it's evident, it speaks for itself that it's a huge gap. So I'm excited that, we have those partnerships and that we're aware. Yeah.
And then, when we look at across the 6 dimensions, race, ethnicity is one of them, that, Indigenous communities falls under that. Unfortunately, they're so severely underrepresented that sometimes there's just not even any data. But if we have it, we break it down, and all of our research is free on our website. So it's available, for anyone.
There was a request to repeat the website. So Tara, can you repeat the NBC Universal
The
website?
easiest way, to access it is GTDI. Sorry, it doesn't quite flow off the tongue. GTDI at NBCU.
NBCU. Okay. And the Netflix website that you mentioned?
Yeah, so it's our socials. So We Are Netflix, and you can find that on LinkedIn and as well as Instagram.
There was another question. Is everyone here on LinkedIn? Anyone not on in LinkedIn? Okay, and I'm going to send a follow-up. So those of you who attended, I can send that in. So there's an anonymous question about some folks who feel excluded with diversity boxes. I mean, I'll just read the text. I'm already analyzing. I shouldn't do that. I'll just read the text. Curious how you advise when we're working so hard to include, how do we not adversely exclude those people that do not check more than one of the diversity boxes and thus are not as attractive to be hired. My reading of that is I feel like there's some folks who feel left behind, some folks that don't feel the buy-in. I've also heard a lot of talk about the diversity hires and how basically everyone, the showrunner may hire all their friends and there's only one role left, and like, oh, the role that's left is for our diversity candidates. So we have individuals who feel like, oh, well, I can't be hired because I'm not quote unquote diverse, whatever that means. So I've read the actual question and then added my own evaluation to it. So I want to own that second part. But I guess as you are seeing these changes, implementing these changes in your organizations, how do you make sure that everybody feels included, that you try to reach the widest audience as possible? Can any of you speak to that?
I mean, I think I will
Sorry, please go.
in and say, like, I feel like, you know, the numbers show that that's not really reality, right? So when you look at the studies, it's still communities that have been historically excluded that are still not getting the same opportunities. So I think if you look at the numbers, it kind of eliminates that feeling of being excluded. It's just not really the reality of the case. But I also think like in thinking of like if we're all coming up together, like more opportunities come, right? Like studies show like when Black women are supported, like the economy like grows, right? Like when different members of communities are supported, we all come up together, right? So I think in thinking of it in that way of like, it's actually not an exclusion of people, but it's actually like when we're all supported, like really beautiful things can happen and we actually can achieve so much more. And so I think it's more of an opportunity versus like, you know, now we're supporting certain people and then now this group has been excluded. It's like, no, this is actually benefiting all of us.
Exactly that, Kristen. It's brilliantly said. I think from my seat, it's having that scarcity mindset that says if someone gets to the door, that means that I don't get to go through, and that's exactly opposite of what we're talking about, right? Like equity is creating more opportunity. It's widening up that door. It's creating a new table that suits everybody. But the feeling of exclusion, you know, I would push back and say, you know, what is that feeling? You know, is it that you're getting left behind, or is it that you feel as though more folks coming in means that, you know, you don't get to come in as well? And everyone is diverse. That's also something that's important to mention. Everyone comes from a different perspective, lens, etc. But when we're naming the specific communities that have been historically excluded, to Kristen's point, these are the folks that don't come through the doors intentionally because of the level of access and barriers that we've built as an industry and as structural barriers. So just important to name that.
Yeah, and just to add, you know, you both said it brilliantly, but I would see as my new job, it's part of my job is to level the playing field, and there's some work to do there. So that's part of it. And then we go along with HR to create opportunity. So, you know, I think the lane can be wide. There's room for us all to move together. So that's my viewpoint on that.
Next question. It's a very long question. I think the gist is about HR department representation. So when you have a box that you have to check and your box isn't there, like are more organizations allowing more boxes to exist and to be checked? I think this has to do with gender identity, sexual orientation. Yeah, just, you know, and there was this clip where one of the House of Representatives talked about not having Arab, Muslim, North African representation on a box meant that she had to check white, and that doesn't represent her. So just could you talk about any efforts in terms of HR efforts or just more inclusion efforts within your organizations, particularly when people feel they have to check a box and that box isn't there for them?
Yeah, we definitely keep abreast on that at NBCU with law and HR, seeing what's legal to put out there as a box, and that changes territory to territory. And also a lot of that information, it must be volunteered. So we're sensitive to that, but we're always on it. It changes all the time. And we want to make sure that we can, you know, any form can reflect as much diversity or knowledge about somebody applying as they want to, as they volunteer to. So we update it all the time.
Another question is, what are your companies doing to help educate at the high school level in underprivileged communities so that they know what jobs are available in the industries?
Yeah, we have some projects in development actually. Now, not in the department I'm with global talent development and inclusion, which is about the business, but definitely with NBCU. We've worked with LAUSD, we've worked with particular high schools. We work with organizations like Ghetto Film School, which would pipeline kids from high school into their programs that get pipelined onto our shows. So not directly in my department, but we do plenty on that front. We also have a fantastic internship program where, again, we are pitching this out to local high schools, but also high schools on the East Coast, wherever we have a HQ. And we've been able to actually roll out those internships online this year, which has created more access. So we're going to look at that model going forward, because not everyone can afford to live in Los Angeles, New York, Chicago, wherever. So yeah, it's an important part of our business piece. So again, this kind of nearly, cradle to grave approach that we want to develop on the long path as well as the wide path.
Let's see. Oh, there's a question about lumping. Okay, I hear from my trans masculine friends that they are often left out of the diversity conversation, that DEI efforts lump all trans people together. Can you speak to that?
No, I want to validate that's a real experience. I think, for me as a cis identifying person, I will never know what it means to move through the world as a trans individual. And I think, in our space in general in IND, we need more representation of trans and non-binary and gender fluid folk in the space to do to help us with this work. But simultaneously, I think as I've been unpacking, cisness, et cetera, it definitely centers. And I think a lot of that has to do with the violence that trans women, like especially trans Black women, face. But simultaneously, as we elevate those voices and the real threat and violence in that community, I think it's so important that we don't ignore the silencing that happens with trans masculine folks and the erasure, quite frankly. So it's definitely top of mind for me and my own journey as I'm unpacking my own cisness, and top of mind for us is, when we talk about IND, we're talking about everybody. But I definitely know that to be true. Disclosure is such a great resource for anyone who is looking to learn more about cisness and transness and centering trans representation. Authentic trans representation does a great job at unpacking some of the struggles of our trans masculine siblings. So definitely recommend that.
And one of the things I just want to add that I learned, I just spoke with a wonderful group called TG Detroit last week. And, when we talk about representation, what they said, what's concerning to them is that, well, even in terms of how we look at the numbers, people maybe not self-reporting, but, when we look at that community, they said most of the community does not, what they so-called would not pass. And most of all, what we see on screen regarding the trans community are people who would so-called pass. And I'm only passing this on because that's what they shared with me. So I think, abundance is one thing, but what Corinne was saying about authentic, and really thinking about the full spectrum of the community, because those people are never seeing themselves in any kind of fictional portrayal whatsoever.
Thank you. Another question, how do you access the Netflix employment program as an Indigenous person?
Great question. Feel free to connect with me. I'm happy to introduce you to some folks inside of my network within Netflix. But also the best way to do it is going to be following We Are Netflix, which is going to have all of our external facing talent pipelining programs. And that's going to be for everything from our HBCU partnerships to anything that we're going to be doing in the future around internships in general. That's going to be your source of truth channel. But in the meantime, I'm happy to connect with you and see, what you're interested in and how I can support.
So that's the end of the questions. If you have more questions, please put them in. We have just a few more minutes. I just wanted to ask the group, like, what are some victories? I think Madeline already shared a couple of the metrics that they've been able to achieve. What are some things that we want to celebrate in this area, some strides that we do feel like have been made that we want to continue doing? And then maybe what's an area that we feel is the next step? What area is going to be adjusted the fastest that we can claim another kind of quick win in this area?
Well, one thing I just want to point out though is, something that we've seen, because, we've been at this since 2004, and is, what I think is very, very inspiring for us is to see that all of the major content creators are now organizationally ready. And what that means is that they have all built sophisticated infrastructure to be able to strategize, get budget, financial support, to be able to move a variety of initiatives, whether it's behind the camera or on screen. That is unprecedented. It is historical. And I would say it's maybe a few years old. We're across the board. And this also is on the corporate side, on the advertising side, that type of content creation also. So for us, having been, pounding the pavement since 2004, that's incredibly inspiring, because in order to do this, they had to invest. You must invest in diversity, equity, and inclusion. It can't just be a cute thing on a website or some affinity groups. You must finance it. And all of the majors are financing in order to be organizationally ready, in order to embrace and drive systemic change. So being the outs, a third party, that's what I see. And Gina and I are really inspired to see that. So I do applaud everyone who's with us, and also our other, cohorts who are out.
I'll use this last word for me as a shout out to a service that we've invested in that you probably all know, but we need to use it more, and that's Ava DuVernay's Array Crew. It is a simple and elegant database for crew members below the line, focused right now in Canada and the US, but spreading globally. It will be the go-to database for crew globally when we, as content creators, use it and upload our projects. So I've seen the numbers as an investor, and we got to do a lot better. And as producers, let's get our projects up there. It's free for people to put their profile up as crew members. So let's use it. Let's be go-to, that every physical production department has access, knows how to use it. And it's a really simple way to make some change. So I'm really happy about that victory this year, to see the launch of that.
Yeah, and I think, I'll just add, as far as wins on my end, like seeing large companies, that we work with, like Endeavor WME, or like some of the studios that we haven't quite announced yet, or production companies that have signed on to say, like, we're going to actually commit to changing our practices across the board. And if we don't do this, we commit to you also holding us accountable. And so that's huge. It's like, it's not just saying like, we're going to do this, right? Like all these companies that we've seen are like, oh, we're going to donate all this money to like Black organizations or communities. And like the study is like, no, none of them did it, right? Like we actually now have the opportunity to hold them accountable for that. And to me, that's a huge step of like, people can like actually, commit to being like, no, we want you to, we want you to check us if we're not doing what we need to be doing internally. And then also like in some of the narratives that we've seen, like we released our crime procedural report, Normalizing Injustice, a few years ago, on like how crime procedurals normalize injustice. And have consulted on like 35, well, maybe 30 of the, in the last year, of major crime shows, but like seeing how there's been a willingness to actually talk about changing practices and stories that impact our communities. So what does restorative justice look like in narratives, and seeing, studios put that in like children's shows even, right? Like how do we like like think about like what punishment means in our communities, and like think about ways that we can actually help people, right, instead of like send them down a spiraling path of like the criminal justice system, or like how do we, we worked with The Rookie, for example, on ABC, of every episode of their entire last season, and like how do we talk about police being held accountable for their actions, or how do we not allow good guys to normalize our favorite character, police characters, committing unacceptable acts, like no knock warrants and kicking down doors, or throwing people in trunks just because they're our favorite characters. And we see how that manifests in real life with like Breonna Taylor and all the things that we've seen in this past year. So I think the receptiveness has been much more in the past year. And I think because we've been inside and we've had to really face a lot of things, there's been an increase of willingness to have those conversations. And so I just want to raise that up and just acknowledge it and say that I hope that that willingness and receptiveness continues beyond this moment.
Yeah, plus 1,000, Kristen. I think, Madeline, what you mentioned earlier around investment just had me dancing in my seat, because I think it's so key. Investment, and then also being properly resourced, right? Like that is, to me, the bare minimum of what we all can be pushing our institutions that we're a part of. Like, what is that financial investment, and then how are we being properly resourced in order to be impactful and setting us up for success from the beginning, rather than a year later when we have burnout and our team is like, we've been doing everything. So be cognitive of that and how we are treating the people who are doing this work. I think also that top-down commitment is vital from the very senior elements of our companies, and I'm grateful to have that at Netflix. And I don't take it for granted at all. I think what I want to leave you all with is definitely moving away from the scarcity mindset. I've been saying it all during our time, but I think it's so key that we move away from it and really expanding our networks and building genuine relationships with people of difference. I think you don't know who you know and who you don't know. So you have to actively seek out those communities. I think currently for me, unpacking ableism and looking at my network and looking around me and seeing I lack that difference in the people who are closest to me. And that is on my own. That's because of me. It's how I was socialized. And now it is my responsibility to go out and seek out these relationships and seek out, all the things that I can gain and mutually benefit from of having folks of difference in my life. And I think as far as huge wins, we, launched our IND report this year, which was our first ever, which was so exciting to be a part of. And I please feel free to check it out, but also to hold us accountable. I think accountability is good. It is good to be called in and to be called out, because it's our commitment to do better. And I think that is our vision and what we want to do. And also the $200 million Grow Creative Initiative that we launched this year as well. That is all about building up talent pipelines and getting those undertold stories, told. So those are the things that I'm smiling about and I'm holding on to. And also just working alongside all you brilliant people and knowing that we do not need to do this alone, because it's all hands on deck.
I think that's the best way to end the panel. I mean, what I'm just hearing is it needs to be funded, it needs to be intentional. We need to do this together, and we need accountability. Though it seems like if we can lead with those initiatives, heavy on the funding, that we can make some institutional change in our industry. I want to thank everyone. I want to thank our panelists. I want to thank everyone for attending. Go back to my script here. So once again, I want to thank our panelists. Tara Halloran, Madeline Denono, Corinne Fry Fuentes, and Kristen Marston. I also want to give a special thanks to Linda Evans and Julie Goldstein and the PGA staff, including Diana White. Give them a round of applause. They're behind the scenes. If you'd like to continue the conversation with us, please be sure to reach out to us on Slack. I want to put, I think in the chat here, this is the playlist of the other the other 5 videos and some other videos around inclusion and equity. And I'm gonna commune with these lovely folks to get some of those links that we were asking about, so you can get the corrected links. So thank you all for attending this evening. Thank you again to our panelists. Thank you to everyone out there. And I hope you have a wonderful evening, and let's get this work done. Let's start working together and get it done.
Thanks,
Thank you all.
Stephanie. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all. Have a wonderful evening.